Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show. And I am so very happy to be talking to Trish Crain about education journalism. Trish, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Trish, you are famous to me and a
Okay.
few other people that I can think of, but you might not be famous to everyone who's watching this. So tell us a little bit about who you are in the present, and then we'll get to the past in a minute.
Okay. I write about schools and education for Alabama Daily News, which is, and also I do work for Alabama Public Television. I cover pre-K, K-12, higher ed. Our news outlet is kind of policy decision maker focused. And so I get to be kind of nerdy and I like that. I've always been into policy. I think that, it shapes the decisions, right? Shapes the actions that end up being done in our classrooms. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Excellent. And for people who might not know what's going on in Alabama and schools, tell us what's going on with Alabama. You all are one of the Southern Surge states, right?
We are. It has been really interesting to be covering this beat. If you had asked me 20 years ago if I thought we would be here and getting national attention for achievement, I would have laughed really openly. But it is really something to see. Alabama, the K-12 world is really doing well in terms of improvement. And that is a surprise sometimes to even Alabamians. It's almost like folks don't believe it, that it is happening. But yeah, we ended up on top in math recovery. Like we made the most progress from basically pre-pandemic until like we kept moving forward, where a lot of folks lost ground during the pandemic. Truth be told, we had a long way to go. We've never been particularly great when it comes to the NAEP, the Nation's Report Card. So we've got that going for us. We're doing really well in chronic absenteeism, lowering that percentage of kids who are missing a whole lot of school. We're
Okay.
doing really well in computer science. Like we have, I've got my thoughts about it, but there are a lot of people sort of rowing in the same direction.
Okay.
And that's been really interesting to watch.
And what else? Do you have ICE? Do you have budget problems? Do you have choice?
Yes. I don't know that we have a lot of ice. We see some reports. We have not seen anywhere near the kind of confrontations, obviously, that have been happening in Minnesota. I don't know. We have like a watchdog organization that shares like the location, but we're not seeing a lot of confrontations. We're
Okay.
not hearing a lot about children being impacted, other than missing school. Kids are missing school here because they are worried about being, their parents picking them up at school and getting caught up in some of the detention facilities. So we have school choice, yes, big time. We started this year with our education savings accounts. We
Okay.
had, we've probably got 13,000 kids using them in private school. About 10,000 of those were already in private school, but we did see some kids leave public schools. We're still, it's this first year waiting to see how those numbers are shaking out.
Hmm.
Um, we had probably, I'm going to say maybe 3,500, 5,000, somewhere around there, kids using it to homeschool because
Right.
that's another avenue that kids can take.
And
Um,
is the state going to join the federal
yes,
choice initiative next year?
yes. Governor Kay Ivey, this is her, she's term limited, so she was not running for reelection. She has been very choice friendly. And, to her credit, when she first took over in 2017, she became governor after a scandal with Governor Robert Bentley, and she was lieutenant governor. So when he left, she became governor. Her first initiative was strong start, strong finish, education focused. And I thought, wow, what a great time to be an education reporter. So that has been an interesting trajectory.
One more thing about the state and the present before we talk about things in the past and nationally. What is the ecosystem of education journalism in the state? You all are a statewide, policy oriented outlet. I get that. Who
Mhm.
else is out there covering schools alongside of you?
Well, we have the Alabama Reflector is a news outlet associated with the gosh, I'm going to forget what they're called. It's State Line,
Yeah,
which is the nonprofit news organizations. So
yeah.
the Alabama Reflector is based in Montgomery, and they have a statewide education reporter doing really good work. Really good work.
Who's
There
that?
is
Who's that? If you happen to remember the name.
Yeah, Andrea Tinker. She's doing really good work.
Okay.
And so it's nice to have company at the State Board of Education meetings. And we even have lunch together, which is also very exciting if we're not trying to make a deadline.
Uh huh.
But we have, of course, we have local reporters, a lot of TV reporting going on about what's happening in schools, a really rich environment there.
And how
And AL.com, which was my former outlet, I don't know that they have a dedicated K 12 reporter anymore, but of course they're still reporting on schools. I
how
don't think I'm forgetting anybody. Go
how
ahead.
about public radio? I know public radio is struggling these days, but sometimes
Yeah,
there's an education reporter.
we don't have an education reporter anymore. We did for a little while. She was fantastic. Kyra
Mhm.
Miles, absolutely wonderful. But she moved on and they did not replace her.
And this is a random question, but I'll ask anyway. Do the Times or AP or any of the other national outlets have a bureau person who ends up covering schools near to you in Alabama?
We have an AP reporter, longtime AP reporter, Kim Chandler. She is just brilliant. I'm always so impressed by like legacy reporters, how fast they can write. I'm a very slow writer, so she can produce a lot of news. When there is statewide news about like our choice, the Choose Act is what we called it, the education savings account. She's certainly covering that. I don't really see a lot of features about schools,
Right.
but yes, she is in the state.
One of the reasons we're here talking today, finally, is that I have been writing about, thinking about, talking to people about education journalism for a while, and I realized that there's something that happened 20 or so years ago that was good, that could maybe happen again in the present, and that's the idea that we take some of this energy and innovation from the outside of traditional journalism,
Hmm.
people called
Hmm.
influencers or content creators.
Hmm.
They go by all sorts of names. These folks have figured out how to get a lot of eyeballs and provide information. Uh,
Hmm.
I've been thinking about the fact that maybe we could find the best of them, the ones that were interested in talking about schools. Maybe they're on TikTok, maybe they're on Instagram, maybe they're on YouTube,
Hmm. Hmm.
and maybe we could bring them in. And it's sort of a crazy idea, except that I remember that a bunch of years ago, there were a bunch of bloggers who were writing about
Hmm.
schools, and we took the best of them. And now some of them have been education journalists for a while. And that's your story, isn't it?
That is my story.
Well,
It's been a wild ride. People will ask me. Some of the younger reporters will say, well, where'd you go to school? And I say, University of Alabama in Birmingham, class of 1987, got a degree in marketing. And they just kind of look at me, and I say, I kind of came in through the side door,
mhm.
and really I really started out kind of as an angry parent, is kind of how I put it. I had a lot of questions as my children were in elementary school, and I just didn't know. I wasn't getting really what I thought were logical answers to my questions about how were we helping kids that were struggling, where were we putting money. I just had a lot of questions, and so I started writing about what I was finding out. We
Mhm.
had those things called forums. I don't know if you remember like the old internet forums.
Like
And
blogs and everything.
yeah, yeah. And so I had, I guess you'd call it a blog, um, where I would post information. And I was big time into data. I still am. I love evidence.
What,
I
what was it? What was it called, Trish? What was your blog called?
So the first one was called the Hoover School Community Information Network, which is way too long. And so it went by the Hoover Skin. It was kind of like the layer that, we had all these thoughts. And it was actually a multi person organization. I was just the only one writing and posting information. But we had a board, we did active work. Uh, we started out trying to promote best practices because we had 10 elementary schools that were all kind of different and having different levels of success. The one that is next door to my house that I went to was struggling. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what brought me to the table. And
And then,
then we moved to the Hoover School Connection. And then my children graduated from school, and I was at a PTA meeting, and somebody from another PTA, it was a multi district PTA meeting, they were talking to legislators about the upcoming legislative session. And this was in 2009. And a frustrated mom said, we don't know what you are doing down in Montgomery. We just have no idea what you're doing. And a legislator said, well, maybe somebody could start writing about that and maybe share that information. And I was sitting in the back, and I kind of slowly raised my hand. And I happened to know that legislator. He was represented my district. And then it kind of unfolded from there. I started tracking legislation, which was difficult in 2009. We didn't have live streams, and we didn't have, so um, I kind of, I think that's when it kind of caught on that, hey, here's this website for educators and for administrators. Really, it was the education community that sort of tuned in to see what information I was sharing. And then it grew from there.
so you went from angry parent to angry blogger.
Yes,
And
yes.
then what happened next? How did you end up becoming an education journalist in the traditional sense?
Well, I think it was, we've never had a large media. We never had a whole lot of media organizations in Alabama. I've been here my whole life, so I can say that. And they started getting smaller, thinning out, letting reporters go, and we had a really great statewide education reporter at AL.com, which was the digital version of the Birmingham News, the Huntsville Times, the Mobile Press Register. But she left. She was raising a family, and there was no one covering education for AL.com. They tried a couple of people, and I don't think they really liked the beat, so they didn't last very long. They moved into other things, and I knew some people that worked there, and was asked a few times, would you be willing to write for us? And I just really didn't know what that meant because I had a lot of freedom, as you can imagine. I'm a one person editorial team.
Yeah.
Um, and I said yes. And luckily they were very patient with me. I had a lot to learn about. I mean, I knew that you couldn't write in first person, and that was about it,
Right.
right? Because I've looked at some of my former writing, and I did have a little more personality in that writing that sometimes I wish I could resurrect a bit.
Mhm.
But, I do think there is great benefit in that objective, middle of the road. Here's the information. Here's what supporters say. Here's what opponents say. Sort of journalism. So I'm happy to still be at it.
We're so happy that you are. So, part of what seems to be going on, as far as I can tell, in education journalism right now, and in journalism in general, is that people don't trust, don't read the news. They're either tuned out entirely, or they're getting a lot of things from social media.
Mhm.
And I had this idea that maybe we need some of the the Trishes of the present, angry parents, former students,
Mhm.
whatever that might be, and we need to bring them in for fresh blood and maybe some fresh approaches. Having been through a version of this, what do you think about that idea? Is that crazy or is that promising?
I think it's hopeful. One of the things that I was not prepared for was even 20 years ago was the level of vitriol that would be aimed at me when I was writing about something that may not have been what a certain faction of the community wanted. Rezoning wars, for instance, right? We also had a pretty high profile football coach who's actually still in Alabama that ran into some trouble in my home district. And that got very, very heated when basically I was trying to keep information in front of people. And people were really hateful. And it was very difficult.
You
Uh,
talking hateful at you online or at the supermarket or both?
Kind of both. I mean, I would go into a room to sit at a meeting, and if there was someone sitting next to me, they would literally get up and move, right? I mean, I was a pariah in every sense of the word, but I
Mm-hmm.
knew that what I was doing was valuable. I was fortunate to have, really good grounding. My family, my parents, I believed in what I was doing. And other people believed in what I was doing. And I guess I kind of felt like I was the only voice because people are, when it comes to school stuff, 20 years ago, people didn't really speak up. They were afraid of retaliation or retribution. I can say my children never suffered any retaliation or retribution. I was
Mm-hmm.
fortunate that my children were, compliant, good kids, but I think it's different now. I've
Okay.
often thought about, I mean, I had anonymous people attacking me, everything from my looks to why was one of my children in private school. I mean, they got very deeply personal in an effort to just make me go away.
Mm-hmm.
But that was before Twitter. I mean, that was before Facebook. This was just comments on articles. And I'll be honest, I shed a lot of tears alone at night thinking, why am I doing this? What is this all for? Now I can look back and think, okay, I stayed true. I also think it's really difficult for people to I don't know why. I mean, I got out of line a couple of times. I will say, I used some strong language to describe a superintendent or, an action that they were taking as discriminatory. So I
Mm-hmm.
had some editorial comments in there early on, but um, it's it gets very personal very quickly. And I think that's difficult for people now. They just don't want to stick their necks out there, and have them cut off.
Right. My take is that education journalism, like journalism in general, is in a bit of a pickle and needs to do some things to fix things and
Hmm.
to revive or yeah, return. Um, but I'm curious about what your take is on education journalism, both in Alabama and elsewhere. How do things look from where you are, and what would you wish for folks to do or want to try? What's your hopeful idea?
So you're giving me softball questions now, right? No, this is, I mean, I do have ideas. I certainly wish that there was more serious attention on schools and not just when something horrible happens or kids are making 36 on the ACT. I think there's this middle ground that really deserves more eyes on it. I think certainly we don't have enough education journalists. I think education journalism is really complex, and you have to, if you're going to situate yourself in, I mean, even covering a single district, there are politics at play. There are policies at play. There's money. There's curriculum. There are, textbook selections. There are board members. There's a city council or a county commission. Like, there are a lot of hands and the educators, let's not forget them, and the families. But there are a lot of hands in and people who are impacted by what's happening in education. But we just don't ever seem to have, if we could have education week in every state, I would be thrilled.
Okay.
I even wanted chalk beat I wanted to be Chalkbeat Alabama when I was the Alabama School Connection. But it was early on, and I did approach them, and they said, just we're not growing just yet. Um, so, and we had a shot at that. We did Alabama Education Lab here.
Right.
I thought it went really, really well. I just think that one of the issues that large media organizations have is, they have to keep moving forward. They have to keep adapting and changing.
Right.
And sometimes ideas that worked for a little while maybe aren't the best ideas for the future.
Mm.
Um, and I grew too. I mean, it makes me sad to think that maybe Alabama Education Lab, for all practical purposes, is no more. But and the reporters, I've moved on. Rebecca Griesbach has moved on. Savannah, who did our child health and wellness beat, she has moved into a different role at AL.com. So I thought we did great work. We did a lot of solutions journalism, which I love. I love talking about what works, especially when you can do local people who are making it work. I think it makes it more real for other local people. And, at least in Alabama, we've never had a really high opinion of ourselves in terms of education achievement. And
Right.
so showing people that our kids can do this, our teachers can do this, I get a lot of joy out of that. So did I sidestep your question?
Yeah, a little
I
bit.
think I did.
We'll come back to it. Um,
Okay.
what are the lessons of the AL.com Ed Lab? Was it too tabloid, for lack of a better word? Was it too
Mhm.
neutral? If you were going to learn from that,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
would the lesson be?
Gosh, so I was not the editor, so there were a lot of decisions and discussions that I was not privy to. Truthfully, I thought we were doing great work.
Okay,
And as I began to see sort of our focus shift a bit, we were a 3-person team, then we were a 2-person team. And then it felt like maybe we were losing focus on the solutions journalism.
got it.
And I don't like, if I had to pin it to any one thing,
Hmm.
I know that funding is always an issue for these types of pursuits.
Right,
To have 3 dedicated reporters
and
uh,
an editor.
and an editor, right? And we had a social media person, like all of that, you have to justify those expenditures. And I don't know, I'm not even 100% sure what our readership was. I mean, I was doing a weekly newsletter, and I got to have a little bit of my voice in that. That was fun. I hope to resurrect that here for Alabama Daily News.
Okay.
But I think, again, not being privy to those high level decisions, I
Hmm.
do think that funding is a lot of it. You just have to justify that your coverage is getting enough eyes
Right.
and people are willing to advertise. That was kind of how
Right.
AL.com makes money, is through advertisement. So I
Here's
don't know if that's helpful.
Oh, that's really helpful, and it resonates with me because here's the box that I hear editors and reporters describe all the time.
Mhm.
Someone like me from the Peanut Gallery says, "Hey, this coverage is inflammatory or distracting. This is not core coverage about kids and schools and learning."
Mhm.
I regularly make fun of school culture wars coverage. I don't even think so much attention should be paid to school gun violence. There are
Mhm.
lots of things where I'm telling people to, you know, uh, tamp it down a little bit and keep focused. And the response I always get is some version of like, "This is news, we have to cover it." And
Right.
we could argue about that, or at least how it gets covered, because there's this ends up being this negativity bias with all the skies falling catastrophe coverage. And then
Right.
the other argument is, hey, we need people to read our work. We're paid professionals. We need to justify our salaries and stuff. And so when you say, and I agree with you, when you say, oh, the coverage focuses on the catastrophes or on the miracles, the 36, the kid who
Mm-hmm.
gets into 27 colleges, um, uh, or when you say, hey, we should bring in another chalk beat, the 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 response I get, and as someone who also calls for this kind of thing, is people who aren't full-time educators, who aren't in the system, aren't going to read it if it isn't interesting, air quotes,
Yeah.
for the civilian reader. Does any of that make sense to you?
All of it, absolutely. And I think when I look back at how did I, get a reputation as somebody who could write about education, it was really among the educators, the education community, who valued what I was writing. And when you think about it, there are 100,000 people employed
Right,
by the Alabama State Department of Education, well, by the local boards, right?
right,
And then and that's everybody's got a teacher in their family practically. My
right,
daughter teaches now, which I had no idea. When she told me she was going to be a teacher, I said, you do know what I do, right? I mean, you know what I've been looking at for many years. But she's having great success in another state. She's not here. um, but yeah, I think the challenge is, to some degree, Alabama has been shielded from, gosh, knock on wood, school shootings. We have had culture wars, but we haven't had, they have basically come from like laws that have been introduced, right? Bills. It isn't like it's actually happening on the ground, though we have had public libraries involved, but not school libraries, right? So, um, we've been shielded from some of that. So I haven't had to jump on that kind of coverage, which I'm thankful for, because I want to talk about how much money have we put into career technical education in the last 10 years. I think that's important when our lawmakers want to talk about the workforce and how do we, is education an economic development tool, or is it, a public good? Is it a personal pursuit? Like these kind of questions are the kind of stuff that I've been able to cover,
right,
especially in this job. But yes, when I know that there is pressure on journalists to cover the thing that sticks out, the thing that is news. And that, of course, takes time away from maybe a solution story that you might be working on that takes a month to develop.
yeah,
Most journalists I know have projects that they want to do, education or not, whatever beat they're on. Rural hospitals, they could use a dedicated reporter here in Alabama. So I don't know how to solve it.
right,
Uh,
right. Neither do I.
yeah.
The We've talked about some hard things. Let's talk about some things that are promising or
Okay.
admirable. I'm a big fan of journalists who get into schools, especially journalists who get into schools that I haven't been in myself. I interviewed Rebecca about her story about
It was
the
great.
new ESA micro school that showed up, and I've interviewed a couple of other journalists that have found their way into schools, new kinds of schools, especially.
Yeah.
Um, what do you admire? And is there anyone out there in Alabama or elsewhere in the nation? You know a lot of the education journalists. Is there anyone out there doing something that you particularly like that we should all be imitating or emulating?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Because there is a lot of really great work. Erica Green's book that just came out, you interviewed her. That really reinvigorated me. I
Okay.
mean, it kind of motivated me. It kind of made me step back and say, wait a minute, this is why I wanted to do this. I wanted people to understand that all of this education stuff impacts students. One of my sayings is students have 1 year in each grade, right? You can't mess up the fourth grade. You can't mess up the seventh grade. It
Right.
has long term impacts. So that was fascinating. That was a
What,
great interview.
what was it about Erica's work or her approach that that really hit for you?
Number one, she's just a great writer. You know, friends, people who know me will be like, "Oh, Trish, don't say this." But I've never felt like I feel like I'm a great policy sort of explainer, nonfiction
Mhm.
kind of person.
Mhm.
But when it comes to telling stories, with you talk about adding color to a story. I mean, I actually wondered, like, what does that mean? I had
Mhm.
to like Google that. I didn't know the word lead. I didn't know what a nut graph was. Like, I just wasn't trained in any of that stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so luckily I've had patient editors, and there's Google. But the way that she has humanized who is at the end of this education product,
Right.
the real impact on families, and there are a lot of writers that do this really well. I thought Rebecca's story was fantastic. I'm a huge fan of hers. I'm sorry to see her step away. I hope that she comes back one day to the
Me too.
journalism world.
Me too. Me
um,
too.
yep, but that, making it real for people and not just some abstract, um, I see this on TV, or I read this story, but I don't feel it because it just doesn't, it doesn't affect me. The people who can break through that, I think, and that means getting into schools, right? That means getting in front of students. I have found it really difficult in a lot of ways, but I am fortunate in that I do have a somewhat of a good reputation among educators, that I'm going to call them out if they're not doing something well, but I'm
Mhm.
also going to make sure to make room for the kudos and the good stuff that's being done. So I feel very fortunate to have made some cold calls, and they've said, come on down, come on down.
Is
And
is that the way to go? Is to uh, have that good
mm,
reputation and build that trust? Because I feel like the only way to humanize what's going on in schools, which we agree is so critically important, and frankly, um, to make the journalism valuable, I should say,
mhm,
because
mhm,
you're giving people a peek inside the black box.
right.
You got to get in the schools. Is that the way to go? What would you tell young reporters who were like, oh, they didn't call me back, or oh, they said no? What do you tell them? What would you tell them?
I would say that isn't surprising, because it just takes one time for an educator or a school system or a school to be burned or to
Mhm.
have a gotcha story, and they really will tune you out. I know people that will say, we will never let a reporter in this building again. So until that principal leaves or somebody has a good experience, this is all very personal to them. I mean, this is not just a job, this is their universe.
Right.
They're in this microcosm of, these are our children, these are our families, these are our teachers.
And their
Uh,
reputations and their jobs. This
exactly.
this drives me a little bit crazy though. So talk me down if you can.
Okay.
In the age of ubiquitous cell phones, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
How come reporters get a no or a no response? How come they don't just go to the editor of the student paper and say, "Hey, would you be a reporter for a day?" Jenna Russell did this in Boston a bunch of years
Hmm.
ago. How come they just don't go to the a student journalist, ask the student to be a journalist in the school for them? Maybe there's a parental
It's a good
permission.
idea. I like this idea. Yeah. Well, I would say,
Yeah, tell me, because it seems crazy that we've got cameras and eyeballs in schools like you wouldn't believe, and yet
mhm.
journalists are stymied.
So I would say, at least here in Alabama, we don't have a lot of student run newspapers, right? There are some, but it's not everywhere.
Right.
Um, and I
I
think,
don't mean formally. Sorry to interrupt. I don't mean literally. It has to be. I
okay,
just mean a
okay.
responsible young person
Hmm. Hmm.
who could document what they were seeing or what was going on in a school. Is that the
I
worst
guess,
idea ever? It might
no,
be.
it's not. It's not a worst idea. I mean, especially if you have some concerns about what's happening in the school. Our I've seen a lot of cell phone videos of teachers saying some really inappropriate things, that I, as a mother, would not want being said in front of my children,
Right.
or being taught. in that particular way.
Yeah.
I mean, I was pretty rough on teachers. If any of my children's former teachers are seeing this, they would say, "Wow, she
Okay.
was rough." I was really hard on teachers,
Right.
and I kind of still am. You know, they have a lot of responsibility, but it is a responsibility to take seriously.
Right.
I don't know. I think there is a suspicion of reporters and what is the point of the story. I actually had a legislator who I've known for years. I had to ask him some tough questions about something that he supported,
Mm-hmm.
and how expensive this pursuit was. And he talked to me. We talked actually on a Saturday morning. He called me, and he was just very halting with his speech. And I said, "Well, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm going for here. You know, why I'm even asking these questions." And
Mm-hmm.
then he said, "Well, I was wondering where you were going with this. Okay, so," and then he loosened up,
Okay.
right? And I think it's that fear of how are they going to spin it
Mm-hmm.
that keeps at least the adults in schools suspicious.
Yeah.
I've also had um, administrators, teachers say to me, "Okay, Trish, you know, I'm trusting you with this," and it's like, "Oh, please don't be fearful. You know, I'm not here for a gotcha. I don't do gotcha journalism. I don't think I even know how to do gotcha journalism because it would just make me feel bad. But you know, if I went into a school and I saw something bad was happening, I wouldn't just ignore it because maybe I know the principal or maybe I know a few teachers there. You know, having been here my whole life, I do know a lot of people, right?
Mhm.
So
So what would you do if something important was going wrong and the school was saying, sorry, you can't come see it?
I probably would try to find another contact there at that school. I
Hmm.
would look on Facebook. I would try to get into some private groups
Hmm.
or public groups, you know, and talk to the administrator of those groups and say, I really need. I mean, I'm actually trying to figure out right now how I want to talk to the folks who are using the Choose Act education savings accounts. I know that we've had kids who have since left the school that they chose. Why did they leave? You know, I think that's important. I mean, kids leave public schools too. Okay, so you know they move or whatever.
Right.
So just kind of to get an idea, and I think you have to keep trying.
Yeah.
Unless your news cycle is such that you had one afternoon to pursue this story and your afternoon is over and now
Mhm.
you have to move to the next day's stories,
Yeah.
because I think that does happen to people. And
Yeah.
I think journalists are really fortunate if their editor will give them time to
Mhm.
pursue those stories, like Krista Johnson's stories. Wow, that was amazing.
Yeah.
She did amazing work. She was in Montgomery
Yeah.
for a time being. That's how I got to know her. Montgomery's our capital city. She was doing amazing work there. She was talking with young people. Like, gosh, she relates really well and
Yeah.
she gets it. Sometimes I worry that my age makes me mom, instead of maybe trusted person for a student to talk with.
Hmm.
But um, I think it is really important to talk with young people. I worry, I know that in Alabama, the grown-ups are quick to dismiss the children's ideas.
Hmm.
I think back to March for Our Lives and the kind of criticism that the young people were getting, even though they were really digging in and they were serious. This was not so they could get their face on television. Same with some of this No Kings protests, right? There was a high school in Mobile that protested ICE. I wasn't there, but they want ICE out of their neighborhoods. Um, Young people are serious. I happen to think that young people are our key to a better world. That's just where I come from.
Yeah.
So I would like, every time I read your criticisms of why aren't you getting into schools more, oh, it's a little bit of a churn in my stomach. Like, yeah, I really need to get into schools more.
I think we all do, and I think it's not an easy thing. And some of the adults are assuming that we won't have time, or We won't like the discomfort, but I think we either got to get in or we've got to find trusted proxies
Mm-hmm.
to get in. But
Right.
easy for me to say, a challenge for everyone to do. I love the fact that you're so persistent. I love the fact that you came from outside journalism. I did as well. Um,
Yep.
uh, you've been shared so many helpful stories with the grade over the years about your own high school experiences and lessons you've learned along the way. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Bye for now.
Bye.